Okay, so today's edition is going to be about BenMarcus, an American writer who I think is doing what no other writer is doing, and he works in the field of language, and he does remarkable things with language because he sort of takes the function of language that as we have, which is to communicate, and he sort of forces it into other functions to show to reflect back on the fact that as a tool of communication, language is actually rubbish. And he's an extraordinary writer, and I can't get enough of this guy. And he is my favourite writer, bar none, currently. So my first introduction to him was The Age of Wire and String, which disappeared from sight, and that wonderful label Dalkey Archive, who saved these sort of really important, significant texts that no one else will read, and they republish them, and this is one of them. And basically, you start reading, and there's sort of, it just seems to be strings of words put together that the words don't associate with each other at all. It makes no sense, and you just think, what is going on here? And then gradually you realise that there is a sort of sense once you figure out what the perspective is. Now, there is no definitive perspective, but the one most often cited for this book is, what if an alien race was studying the human race, and in particular, this book they produce as their verdict on our language function? And then it begins to make sense because basically it's aliens observing our daily actions. They don't have the vocabulary, they don't have the conceptual apparatus because it's all alien to them, but they sort of have enough of our language in terms of a vocabulary without the concept behind it to put together these word strings which they think explain what we do. And they don't. Well, not as we understand it anyway. And it just sets up this constant resonance of words, function, description, and gradually you see, actually, this is a really bad tool that we use, and these aliens, through their misunderstanding of it, translates back to us, whereas we're really not best served by this at all. And it is a stunning work, and absolutely stunning. There are beautiful passages of strange language. It's a language we recognise the words, we recognise the vocabulary, but its usage is strange. But gradually you kind of get into it, and it's stunning. This was his last novel called The Flame Alphabet, and basically it is the words spoken by teenagers hurt their parents, not just emotionally but literally. It causes a condition brought about as words as a virus or a disease, and parents have to be separated from their children for their own protection. And within that, it does a brilliant analysis of how language works and doesn't work, and the function of language. So, for example, there's a scene about the protagonist parents are evacuated for their own safety, and there's a sort of, before that happens, there's a whole series of meetings of the parents of adults on what, when the crisis happens and this disease breaks out in our area, how do we respond to it? And there's all this backwards and forwards ideas and suggestions, and it's very bureaucratic. It's almost like how an army would respond to a natural disaster or something. And you realise that bureaucratic language cannot save you because it's not up to the task. So bureaucratic language is not up to you. And in fact, no language is up to saving you. And when they're in isolation from their children, it's so poignant. The husband and the wife, the wife's sort of wasting away because she misses her child, and yet her child can only hurt her. It's just, it's fantastic. It's not an easy. I mean, BenMarcus is not an easy read, and it's not something you can sort of read casually, as a quick read or a convenient read. You have to work, because words are being asked to do things that they're not normally asked to do, and we have to go with that and try and penetrate what their function is within his books. But stunning, stunning. And this is a book of his short stories called Leaving the Sea. Now the first four stories are quite conventional. They don't sort of employ the devices of these. But after that, again, it's BenMarcus territory about language. So, for example, there's a story called First Love, I think. Yeah, First Love, where it's about there's that dance of seduction between two people, viewed by a third person of who feels the function of a voyeur, but again in a way like Age of Wire and String, it's not just a pervy voyeur. It's someone, an alien, an outsider, an ET, whatever, trying to penetrate the codes of seduction, and doesn't have the vocabulary of sex and seduction. So it's a brilliant dissection of that whole, two people trying to get down to get jiggy, and all that's involved in that, and peeling that back, and the sort of dishonesty of language and language's inability to basically get to a very physical place, which is the act of coitus. So there's that story. There's also one called The Father Costume, where this is genius, where there is no language. Language is rationed, it's muted, and instead of spoken language, there's a language of fabric, the clothes you wear. That does your speaking for you. And this is basically a father and a son. Now, fathers and sons don't always communicate openly anyway. But when you don't have a voice to do it, you can only do it through sort of bits of fabric that you adorn your body with. It's just, again, so it just turns our world on its head in order for you to look back and see how things work and don't work in our world. And again, it's a father and son, so it's deeply, deeply poignant. But it's so off kilter because they can't talk to each other, but they still communicate through what they wear and stuff. It's brilliant. So this guy, BenMarcus, if you're prepared to put in the work, would enlighten you like no other author alive today that I'm aware of about how language works and doesn't work. And I think that's one of the few areas uh, left that are fresh in fiction. In a way, you have Beckett and Joyce who almost put the full stop on language, because Beckett's way was to go for very sort of precise poetic language to describe the impossibility of conceptualizing human life as anything but despairing, and the march towards death and all of that. So for all the precision that he employed, it was still ended up at despair. And in a way, the only thing about, not the only thing, but one of the vestiges of Beckett's work is that the musicality of his language, in a way, that's all you have left, because it takes you to a dead end, the dead end of death and cessation and all that sort of stuff. Whereas Joyce basically, by the time of Finnegan's Wake, he just said, okay, I'm going to throw everything in the dictionary at it. I'm going to make up new words. I'm going to make surprising combinations of words. And he threw the kitchen sinker language at it in this attempt to somehow encapsulate the human experience. So in a way, those two were the sort of the two ends of the spectrum. And it's very hard to do anything else about language in fiction since. But I think BenMarcus, because he's looking more at the function of language than the language itself, I think he genuinely has got something to offer that is fresh and rewarding, that adds to Joyce and Beckett, and there aren't many authors who can do that. So, yeah, BenMarcus, my favourite author today. Till next time.